Jake Mitchell's knees ached as he crouched behind the dumpsters of Station Kepler's lower district. His hands moved automatically through the pile of discarded meal packs, checking each one for anything edible. 3 years. 3 damn years since humanity had joined the Galactic Union, and here he was, living like a rat in the walls of someone else's house. The metallic smell of recycled air mixed with rotting food made his nose wrinkle. Around him, the station hummed with life. Wealthy traders from a dozen worlds walked the upper levels, their bellies full, their pockets heavy. Down here in the salvage district it was different. Down here you took what you could get. His fingers closed around a protein bar. Half-eaten, but the wrapper was still mostly sealed. Good enough. Jake's stomach cramped with hunger. He hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The job at the loading docks had dried up when a Hixarian crew underbid him. They could work twice as long without rest. Humans couldn't compete with that. He was about to take a bite when he heard it. Not with his ears. In his mind. Soft like a child whispering in the dark. Can we eat your leftovers? Jake froze. His hand dropped to the knife on his belt. Pirates? Telepaths were dangerous. Could rob you blind without even touching you. He pressed his back against the cold metal of the dumpster and waited. Nothing happened. Then he saw movement in the shadows between 2 trash containers. Small shapes, barely visible in the dim light. Jake's eyes adjusted slowly. For creatures emerged, moving carefully, like they expected him to attack. His breath caught. Dragon cubs. He'd seen the Vishari on the news feeds. Everyone had. They were legends. Warriors who'd conquered 20 star systems before humans even figured out faster-than-light travel. Their warships could crack planets. Their soldiers were unstoppable. The galaxy feared them. These weren't fearsome warriors. These were babies. Starving babies. Their scales, which should have shimmered like oil on water, were dull and dusty. Jake could count every rib beneath their thin hides. Their wings hung limp against their sides. The smallest one, no bigger than a house cat, had scales that flickered with a faint blue color. The little dragon looked up at him with eyes too large for its narrow face. Those eyes were blue. Deep blue. Human blue. Please, that soft voice whispered in his mind again. We're so hungry. Jake's hand relaxed on his knife. They were just kids. Scared, hungry kids. A sound behind them made him tense again. Something bigger moved in the darkness. Jake's knife was out before he could think. He'd survived 3 years on this station by being careful. Trusting no one. Expecting the worst. A figure stepped into the weak light from the overhead strips. Female. Vishari. Young, maybe his age. Her wings were torn, edges ragged like torn fabric. Blood matted the scales on her left side. Her armor, which should have gleamed, was cracked and dented. One arm hung at an odd angle. Broken probably. But her eyes were sharp. Alert. Dangerous. She positioned herself between Jake and the cubs immediately. Her good hand went to her side to where a weapon should have been. Nothing there. She'd lost it. But she stood her ground anyway, ready to fight with broken bones and empty hands. Jake recognized that look. He'd seen it in the mirror back on Earth, in the Detroit shelters after his parents died. That look that said, I've got nothing left, but I'll die before I let them hurt the kids. Please, she said aloud this time. Her translator device was damaged, crackling and hissing. Her voice was rough with pain and exhaustion. Just, let them eat first. Then do what you will. Do what he will. She expected him to hurt them. Or report them. Or chase them away. The way everyone chased humans away when they begged for work or food or just a warm place to sleep. Jake looked down at the protein bar in his hand. His stomach felt like it was eating itself. He planned to save half for tomorrow. Maybe stretch it to 2 days if he was careful. Winter was coming to this sector of the station. The heating costs would go up. He'd need every credit just to keep from freezing. The smallest cub whimpered. Its legs shook as it tried to stand. Jake thought about his kid sister back before the adoption agency took her. How she'd looked at him that last day, trusting him to make everything okay. How he'd failed. He looked at the protein bar. Then at the cubs. Then at the young Vishari warrior who was swaying on her feet but refusing to fall. All right, he muttered. His hands moved before his brain could stop them. He broke the protein bar into 5 pieces. Not equal pieces. 4 larger ones and 1 small one. The cubs needed it more. They were still growing. The young Vishari stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Jake held out the first piece to the blue-eyed cub. Her name was Kira. She told him on the 3rd day after he'd brought them food twice more. She still watched him like a cornered animal watches a threat. Her hand never strayed far from a piece of broken pipe she'd turned into a weapon. Jake didn't blame her. Trust was a luxury neither of them could afford. But he kept coming back. Every evening after his shift at whatever loading dock would hire him that day, Jake showed up at the abandoned storage unit where they'd been hiding. He brought whatever he could manage. Sometimes it was his own rations. Sometimes it was expired food packs he'd talked the kitchen staff into giving him instead of dumping. Once, he brought a whole bag of nutrient bars he'd won in a dice game with some dock workers. The cubs learned his footsteps. They'd perk up when they heard him coming, their tails twitching with excitement. The smallest one, the blue-eyed cub Kira called Flicker, would rush to greet him every time. The little dragon had attached himself to Jake like glue. Week by week, Jake watched them change. Their ribs stopped showing. Their scales started catching the light again. Ash, the largest, developed deep red coloring. Ember glowed orange when she got excited. Spark had silver streaks along his spine. And Flicker's blue scales started to shimmer like water. Kira's arm healed slowly. Jake had stolen medical supplies from the station clinic. Nothing major, just basic stuff. Bandages. Antiseptic. Pain medication. She never said thank you, but she stopped reaching for her makeshift weapon when he entered. One night, Jake sat on the floor showing Flicker how to eat a synthesized protein cake. The little dragon kept trying to swallow it whole and choking. Jake broke it into smaller pieces, demonstrating. Flicker mimicked him, taking tiny bites. His tail wagged. Kira watched from the corner where she always sat. Her wings were folded tight against her back. Her eyes never left Jake's hands. "Why?" she asked suddenly. Jake glanced up. "Why what?" "This." She gestured at the food, at him, at everything. "Humans are poor. Everyone knows this. You are at the bottom of the station's hierarchy. You need this food for yourself." Jake shrugged. He'd been asked this before by other humans who thought he was crazy for giving away food he couldn't spare. Had a dog once back on Earth. Before everything went to hell. Scrappy little thing, all bones and attitude when I found her behind a restaurant. Flicker crawled into his lap. Jake scratched behind the cub's ear ridges. The little dragon made a purring sound. "Shared my lunch with her every day for a month," Jake continued. "My mom said I was being stupid. Said we barely had enough for ourselves. But I couldn't just let her starve, you know? She was just trying to survive." He smiled, remembering. "That dog lived 16 years. Best friend I ever had. Followed me everywhere. Slept on my bed. Protected me from bullies at school even though she weighed maybe 30 pounds. His voice softened. "When the recruiters came for the colony ships, she was too old to pass the health screening. Had to leave her with my neighbor." The room was quiet except for Flicker's purring. "I am not your pet," Kira said. Her voice was low, dangerous. Jake met her eyes. "Never said you were." "Then why?" "Because those cubs?" Jake looked down at Flicker, then at the other three sleeping in a pile near the heater. "They're just kids. And I'm not gonna let kids starve when I can do something about it. Don't matter what species they are. Don't matter if I get nothing back. It's just the right thing to do." Kira's translator crackled. It couldn't seem to process whatever expression was on her face. Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, she just looked away. After that night, something shifted. Kira started talking more. She told him about Vishari honor codes. About how she'd been part of a scouting mission that went wrong. How her squad had been ambushed by pirates. She'd grabbed the cubs from the ship's nursery and ran. Everyone else died. She'd been hiding in the station's lower levels for 2 months, watching her charges slowly starve because she couldn't hunt, couldn't work, couldn't do anything without being spotted by station security. Jake told her about Earth. About Detroit before the water wars. About his family. About how humans had learned to survive on scraps and determination because that's all they'd ever had. 3 weeks passed. The cubs grew stronger. Kira's wing membranes healed enough that she could fold them properly. Jake had started bringing tools and materials, helping her fix up the storage unit. It almost felt like a home. Then everything changed. Jake was teaching Ember how to regulate her body temperature when the alarms went off. Not the station's regular alarms. Something else. A deep, resonating tone that made the walls vibrate. Kira's head snapped up. Her scales rippled with sudden fear. "No. What is it?" Jake asked. "Warship. Vishari warship." Within an hour, soldiers flooded the lower decks. Jake heard their heavy boots on the metal floors. Heard doors being kicked open. Heard people shouting in languages he didn't understand. He barely had time to usher Kira and the cubs into his own quarters 2 levels up. It wasn't much. Just a tiny room with a cot and a storage locker. But it was registered to him. Legal. Safer than the abandoned unit. They didn't even get the door locked. It exploded inward. The frame bent. The door hit the opposite wall hard enough to dent it. A massive Vishari warrior stood in the doorway. His armor was black and silver. Scars crossed his face and neck. His eyes glowed amber in the dim light. Those eyes locked onto Kira. The warrior stood completely still. His mouth opened slightly. Whatever he'd expected to find, it wasn't this. "Sister," he said. His voice was rough with shock. "You live." The 4 cubs scrambled behind Jake's legs. Flicker pressed against his calf, trembling. Jake's hand instinctively went to his knife, though he knew it would be useless against armor like that. Kira stood frozen. Her wings spread slightly, an automatic defense posture. "Brother," she whispered. The warrior's name was Drake. And he was not happy. Drake stood in the doorway like a wall of muscle and armor. His presence sucked the air out of the tiny room. Jake had seen Vishari warriors on the news feeds before, but seeing one up close was different. The guy was easily 7 feet tall. His shoulders were broad enough to block the entire doorway. Scars crisscrossed his face and neck like a roadmap of violence. "You will return home. Immediately." Drake's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had the weight of absolute authority behind it. The kind of voice that expected obedience without question. He looked at Kira. Just looked at her. And Jake saw something flicker across the warrior's face. Relief maybe. Or anger. Hard to tell with aliens. Then Drake's eyes shifted to Jake. The disgust was obvious. He looked at Jake the way people looked at garbage. Like something unpleasant they'd stepped in. "Your obligation to this, scavenger, is noted and dismissed." Scavenger. The word hit like a slap. Jake's hands curled into fists at his sides. "No." Kira's voice was sharp. Her wings flared open, filling half the room. The membranes caught the light, showing the repaired tears. "He saved my life. He saved them." She gestured at the cubs huddled behind Jake. "I owe him a blood debt." Drake's expression hardened. "He is human." He spat the word like a curse. "They've been spacefaring for 3 years. 3. They don't understand our ways. They don't understand honor. They barely understand basic technology." Jake had been trying to stay quiet. He'd learned over 3 years on this station that humans didn't win arguments with other species. They were too new. Too poor. Too weak. Everyone treated them like children playing at being adults. But something in Drake's tone made his jaw clench. That casual dismissal. That certainty that humans were beneath notice. "I understand plenty," Jake said. Drake's eyes snapped to him. "You dare." "I understand your sister was bleeding out in an alley." Jake's voice was steady. "Come." But there was steel underneath. "I understand those kids were eating garbage. Literal garbage. Stuff even I wouldn't touch. And I understand that every one of you flew past this sector for 3 months and didn't notice." The room went silent. Even the cubs stopped whimpering. Drake's hand drifted toward the blade at his hip. It was a casual movement. Easy. Like swatting a fly. But Jake didn't flinch. He'd grown up in Detroit during the water riots. He'd seen violence. Hell, he'd survived violence. Fear was useful. Panic would get you killed. "You want to talk about obligation?" Jake continued. His heart was hammering but his voice stayed level. "Fine. Let's talk. Where were you? She's your sister. Family, right? That's supposed to mean something. Where were the mighty Vishari warriors when she needed them?" Kira made a small sound. Surprise maybe. Or fear. Drake's face was unreadable. His hand stayed on his blade. For a long moment, nobody moved. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. Could feel Flicker trembling against his leg. Then Drake spoke. "Do you know what you're saying, human?" "Yeah," Jake said. "I'm saying you failed her. I'm saying I found her when you couldn't. And I'm saying that maybe your honor codes don't mean much if they let a warrior and 4 kids starve while you're flying around space playing soldier." Drake's blade was out. Fast. So fast Jake barely saw it move. The edge stopped an inch from Jake's throat. He could feel the heat radiating from the metal. Some kind of energy blade. It hummed. "Brother, no." Kira lunged forward, putting herself between them. Drake didn't lower the blade. But he didn't push forward either. He stared at Jake over Kira's shoulder. His amber eyes were cold. "You have courage, human. I'll give you that. Stupid courage, but courage nonetheless." "The human is right," Kira said quietly. Her voice was steady despite the blade inches from her face. "He found us when our own did not. He fed us when he was hungry. He sheltered us when he had no shelter to spare. By our own laws, I owe him a blood debt. You cannot dismiss it." Drake's jaw worked. Muscles bunched under his scales. Finally, slowly he lowered the blade. But his eyes never left Jake. "Fine," Drake said. "You claim to understand honor? To understand what it means to be worthy of a Vishari's debt." He sheathed his blade with a sharp click. "Then prove it. Prove that humans deserve to walk among warriors." He turned to face Jake fully. 7 days. You will survive in the underdeck alone. No weapons. No supplies. No help from anyone including my sister. The underdeck is where this station throws its refuse. Pirates. Criminals. Things that would kill you for sport. Jake knew the underdeck. Everyone did. It was where you went when you had nowhere else to go. He'd avoided it for 3 years because people who went down there didn't usually come back up. "If you emerge after 7 days, Drake continued, "alive and intact, I will acknowledge your worth. I will recognize the debt. And I will ensure the Vishari respect humanity's place in the Union." He smiled, showing teeth. "If you fail, the matter is settled. Kira returns with me. The cubs return. And humans remain what they are. Scavengers." Jake looked at Kira. Her eyes were wide. Terrified. She knew what the underdeck was. She knew what he'd be facing. The smart move was to refuse. To walk away. Let them leave. He'd done his part, right? He'd kept them alive. That should be enough. But it wasn't about smart anymore. It was about proving something. Not to Drake. To every alien on this station who looked at humans like they were trash. Jake met Drake's eyes. "Deal." Kira closed her eyes. Flicker made a small, sad sound. Drake's smile widened. "You have until dawn to prepare yourself, human. Then you descend. The clock starts when you reach the lower level." He turned and walked out. His boots echoed down the corridor. Kira grabbed Jake's arm. Her claws dug in slightly. "You can't. You don't know what's down there." Jake gently removed her hand. "Yeah," he said. "I do." He had 7 hours until dawn. The elevator down to the underdeck was broken. Of course it was. Everything down here was broken. Jake took the maintenance stairs instead, descending level by level into the guts of Station Kepler. The air got thicker with each floor. Warmer. The smell changed from recycled air to something else. Sweat. Rust. Decay. Things rotting in corners. The lights flickered. Half of them were burned out. The walls were covered in graffiti in a dozen languages Jake couldn't read. Warnings probably. Territorial markers. Gang signs. He reached the bottom level and stepped into hell. The underdeck stretched out like a twisted maze. Corridors branched in every direction. Steam hissed from broken pipes. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was screaming. The sound cut off abruptly. Jake's hand instinctively went to his belt, but there was nothing there. No knife. No tools. Drake had made sure of that. Just him. Just 7 days. Just survival. The first night was the worst. Jake found a corner near a defunct air vent and tried to stay awake. He'd learned in the Detroit shelters that sleep got you killed. But exhaustion dragged at him. His eyes kept closing. Footsteps woke him. Heavy. Multiple sets. Jake was on his feet instantly, back pressed against the wall. 3 Krellians emerged from the shadows. Insect-like aliens with 4 arms each. Their mandibles clicked as they talked amongst themselves. One of them pointed at Jake. They all laughed. It wasn't a friendly sound. "Give us everything," the leader said in broken universal standard. Credits. Food. Clothing. Everything. Jake's heart pounded. 3 against 1. They had weapons. Crude things. Metal pipes. A broken bottle. But weapons. "I don't have anything," Jake said. It was true. He'd come down with nothing. "Then we take your life instead." The leader stepped forward. Jake's mind raced. Fighting was suicide. Running was impossible in this maze. That left one option. "You hungry?" Jake asked. The Krellians stopped. Looked at each other. The leader's mandibles twitched. "What?" "You heard me. You hungry?" "Yeah, me too. Been hungry my whole life." Jake kept his voice calm. Conversational. Like they were old friends. "Know what I know though? I know where the commissary dumps its expired stock." The leader tilted his head. "What stock?" "Food. Real food. Not the garbage down here. Stuff from the upper levels. They throw it out when it hits the expiration date printed on the package. But here's the thing." Jake leaned forward slightly. "That date? It's just a legal thing. The food's still good for weeks after. Sometimes months if it's sealed right." The Krellians were listening now. "There's a disposal chute on level 7, Jake continued. "Every night at 2200 hours, they dump the day's expired inventory. Comes down a service shaft. Ends up in a compactor. But if you're there before the compactor cycles. He shrugged. Enough food for all of us. The leader's mandibles clicked rapidly. Thinking, why tell us? Because I can't carry it all myself. Because you're going to be hungry tomorrow too. And because. Jake met his eyes. Because down here we're all in the same boat. We can kill each other over nothing, or we can work together and maybe not starve. Silence. Long enough that Jake thought he'd miscalculated. Then the leader lowered his pipe. Show us. By the second night, Jake had 12 people following him. The Krellians had told others. A Vaxian female with burns covering half her face. 2 human refugees who'd been hiding in the service tunnels. A young Turellian who'd gotten trapped down here after his work visa expired. An old Hixarian who'd given up trying to leave. Jake showed them the food chute. Showed them how to time it. How to bypass the compactor's safety lock. That night they ate. Really ate. For the first time in who knows how long. What else you know? The Vaxian asked, her voice rough from disuse. Jake thought about it. You a mechanic? She nodded. There's broken equipment all over this level. Life support. Water recyclers. If we can fix some of it, make this place more livable? He looked around at the group. We all benefit. By the 4th night there were 30 people. Word spread fast in the underdeck. The human who shared instead of hoarded. Who organized instead of conquered. Jake set up watch schedules so people could sleep safely. Mediated disputes between rival groups. Convinced a Turellian doctor who'd lost his license to start treating the sick in exchange for food and protection. Found a human engineer named Tommy who rigged up better lighting using salvaged parts. The underdeck started to change. Slowly. Small things at first. People stopped attacking each other on sight. Groups started trading instead of fighting. Someone cleared out a space and set up a communal cooking area. On the 6th day, everything almost fell apart. Raiders hit the underdeck. A gang from level 12. 20 armed thugs looking for easy prey. They'd heard about the food. About the supplies. They wanted it. They expected chaos. Scattered victims running in panic. Instead they found barricades. Coordinated defenders. People who'd been enemies a week ago now fighting side by side. The Krellians held the main corridor. The Vaxian had rigged alarm systems. Tommy had built improvised defenses from scrap metal. And Jake stood in the middle of it all. You've got a choice, he called out to the raiders. His voice echoed off the metal walls. Join us or leave. We're building something here. Something better than stealing and killing. You want food? We'll share. You want shelter? We'll make room. But if you attack again, you're not attacking me. You're attacking all of us. He gestured to the 30 people behind him. Different species. Different backgrounds. United. The raider leader looked around. Did the math. Lowered his weapon. What do we have to do? He asked. Help, Jake said simply. Just help. They joined. When Drake descended to retrieve Jake on the 7th day, he brought a full squad of warriors. They were prepared for anything. Violence. Carnage. A dead human. They found a neighborhood. People were cooking communal meals over repaired heating elements. Children played in cleared spaces, supervised by adults from 3 different species. Someone had painted murals on the walls. The lights worked. The air smelled clean. Drake stood frozen at the entrance. His amber eyes wide. Uncomprehending. What did you do? He breathed. Jake sat on a cargo container, exhausted. He'd barely slept in 7 days. His clothes were filthy. His hands were cut and bruised. But he was alive. He looked up at Drake and shrugged. Helped. Drake stood at the entrance to the underdeck like a man witnessing a miracle he didn't believe in. His warriors fanned out behind him, hands on weapons, ready for violence. But there was no violence. There was cooking. Laughter. Children playing. Around him, 40 different species worked together. A Krellian was teaching a human child how to fix a circuit board. A Vaxian and a Turellian were hauling water together, talking in a mix of universal standard and hand gestures. An old Hixarian sat with 3 others, sharing a meal from a single pot. Drake had conquered 12 worlds. He'd won 300 battles across 50 star systems. He'd commanded fleets. Led armies. Watched enemies kneel before him. But he'd never seen anything like this. These people had been enemies a week ago. Rivals. Predators and prey. The underdeck was supposed to be a war zone. A place where the station dumped its problems and let them kill each other. That was how it had always been. How? Drake asked. His voice was barely a whisper. Jake sat on a cargo container 20 feet away. He looked terrible. His face was gaunt. dark circles under his eyes. His hands were wrapped in makeshift bandages, stained with blood and grease. His clothes hung on him like he'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. But he was alive. Jake was too tired for diplomacy. Too tired for careful words. Too tired to care if he offended a warrior who could snap him in half. "Your people fight to win," he said. His voice was hoarse from days of talking, organizing, mediating. "Humans fight to survive. There's a difference." Drake's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Jake gestured around with one bandaged hand. "You conquer. You dominate. You're good at it. The best, probably. But humans?" He laughed, a dry sound. "We come from a planet that tried to kill us every single day. Predators. Diseases. Weather. Other humans. Everything wanted us dead." He slid off the container, standing on shaky legs. "So we learned something you never had to learn. We learned that you survive better together. Not by conquering. By cooperating. By lifting each other up instead of stepping on each other's necks." Drake's hand went to his blade. "Instinct." But he didn't draw it. "That's not weakness," Jake continued. His eyes were hard despite the exhaustion. "That's how humans conquered Earth. Not by being the strongest or the fastest or the most dangerous. We were none of those things. We survived because we worked together. Because we shared. Because we refused to let our people starve when we could help them." He pointed at the community around them. This is what humans do. We build. We organize. We make things better. Not for ourselves. For everyone. Because we learned that when everyone survives, we all survive." The underdeck was quiet. People had stopped working to listen. They understood maybe half of what Jake was saying, but they understood the tone. The conviction. Drake stared at him for a long moment. His jaw worked. His scales rippled with some emotion his face couldn't show. Finally, slowly he moved. He placed his fist over his heart. The gesture was formal. Precise. Sacred. Every Vishari warrior behind him gasped. Some stepped back. One dropped his weapon in shock. "You have proven your worth, Jake Mitchell," Drake said. His voice carried across the underdeck. "More than that, you have proven humanity's worth. By the old laws, by blood and honor, I acknowledge the debt. I acknowledge your people." Jake just nodded. He was too tired to feel triumphant. Too exhausted to celebrate. "Come," Drake said. "You've earned your rest." The trip back up to the residential levels was a blur. Jake's legs barely worked. One of Drake's warriors had to help him walk. The whole station seemed to be watching. News traveled fast. Everyone wanted to see the human who'd survived the underdeck. When they reached Jake's quarters, the door was already open. Kira stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the light inside. Her wings were half spread, tense with worry. The moment she saw Jake, something in her posture relaxed. But it was Flicker who moved first. The little dragon burst past Kira's legs and launched himself at Jake. He'd grown. Doubled in size in just a week. His scales gleamed blue and silver. Healthy. Strong. Flicker climbed up Jake's chest and perched on his shoulder, nuzzling against his neck. The purring sound filled the corridor. Jake's hand came up automatically to scratch behind Flicker's ear ridges. The gesture was unconscious. Natural. Like he'd been doing it forever. Ash, Ember, and Spark crowded around his legs, their tails wagging. They chirped and clicked, talking over each other in their minds. "Welcome back. Missed you. Worried." Drake watched this with an unreadable expression. Then he nodded once to Kira and turned to leave. His warriors followed. Inside the quarters, Jake collapsed onto his cot. Flicker refused to leave his shoulder. The other cubs piled onto the bed around him. Kira sat in her usual corner, but closer now. Her blue eyes studied him. "You could have demanded anything," she said quietly. "Territory. Well, a position in our fleet. Drake would have given it. The debt requires it." Jake's eyes were already closing. Flicker's purring was like a lullaby. "Don't want any of that." "Then what do you want?" He looked at the four cubs. Looked at Kira. His voice was soft, slurred with exhaustion. "Just making sure no one goes hungry. That enough?" Kira's expression did something the translator couldn't process. Respect maybe. Or recognition. Understanding. "For humans," she said softly, "it will have to be." Jake was asleep before he could respond. Word spread through the Galactic Union that night. Through communication channels and trade routes. Through military networks and civilian gossip. The Vishari who knelt to no one had knelt to a human. Not because he'd beaten them in combat. Not because he'd bribed them or threatened them. Because he'd shown them what strength really meant. In the years that followed, other species would learn the same lesson. Station Kepler became a hub for human activity. The underdeck became a model for station reform across the Union. And humanity, the poor newcomers everyone had dismissed, found their place. Not through conquest. Not through superiority. But through something the galaxy had forgotten in its millennia of war and competition. The stubborn refusal to watch others suffer when they could help. The insistence on lifting others up. The bone-deep belief that survival meant cooperation, not domination. Even when they were suffering themselves. Especially when they were suffering themselves. That was the human way. And the galaxy would never be the same.